Most of you know us as Quakers, but our real name is the Religious Society of Friends. And the term "speak truth to power" is attributed to Quaker civil rights leader Bayard Rustin, who influenced Martin Luther King and many others. A great recent example of speaking truth to power was tonight's speaker, Medea Benjamin, confronting the Reagan-era vampire, Elliot Abrams. He is now returned from the crypt as U.S. Special Representative for Venezuela when he testified before the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee hearing on Venezuela recently, and that was very, very impressive. When the U.S. desires regime change, we don't use Facebook, but we send in the Marines or the CIA. See Chile, Congo, Grenada, the Dominican Republic, and now perhaps Venezuela. Fortunately, we have Ms. Benjamin, Noam Chomsky, Amy Goodman, the spirit of Howard Zinn, and other heroes who won't let things go by that easily. Thank you. With that, I pass it to you.
Thank you all for coming out this evening. It's going to be a very full program. We're excited to hear Medea speak. I think most of you know Brooklyn for Peace. We've been around since 1984. And we are a local peace advocacy group, activist group that run educational events like this. But really, we are founded in activism. So as much as we believe in educating people and letting them know the ideas and the trends that are happening in politics, we also want people to come out and be active, whether it's as simple as making a phone call to a congressperson, or right now to a city council person and asking them to support the resolution of Idaris Rodriguez to saying it's a sense of the city council that New York City is being robbed by all the money being spent in the Pentagon and changes have to be made in Washington. You can make that simple phone call. But there's other ways to be active too. With the weather changing now, we're going to be out on street corners. We're going to be, thank you. We're going to be active on Venezuela. We're going to be active on Iran, on the Pentagon budget, on all the things that affect the way that war is being waged constantly in this world by this country. So that's Brooklyn for Peace, in case you weren't familiar with us. But right now, we are going to have a cultural aspect to our evening. We're going to hear from Dave Lippman. Again, many of you know him, but for those of you who don't, he is a serious satirical songwriter who has toured internationally and been banned in Teaneck, New Jersey. He has also been banned from Yugoslavian television, not to mention American television. He has been called a national treasure by a newspaper that has since folded, and once received a letter from a student activist saying, "The dean felt that more harm than good would come from your visit here." His new show, which will open in Long Island City, is titled I Hate Amazon.
We're all here celebrating the Green New Deal, which is going to be a big hit. I say it slower. Green New Deal. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, I can just tell you in advance what the chords are, and it'll give you now you know what the chords are. This isn't so much me as it's not me, it's us. Where did I steal that from? We're all in a sickness. We need to wake up. We need to wise up. We need to know where our eyes and do it now. We need to stop climate destruction. segue. It's costing extra because I picked 2 songs at once. Oh well.
Modern technology. There we go. Oh, you got it.
Whoa!
Oh. There we go.
Oil and coal stored in the earth, we shall not be moved. Where can I fight for all the world? We shall not be moved just like a tree. Planted by the water, we shall not be moved. Gas burning jets and ships and tanks, we shall not be moved. Cause greenhouse gases sail up fast, we shall not be moved just like a tree. Planted by the water, we shall not be moved. And all the spaces for, we shall not be moved. Oil is a reason for war, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree, planted by the water, we shall not be moved. Travel is so scarcity, oh, we shall not be moved. Bring our lives for humanity, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree, planted by the water, we shall not be moved. We need a Red Cross fund. Sorry, I'm really going back to the other one. We need a Red Cross for climate chaos. Our future hangs by a thread. We need to stop. Wait for wondering, and we need to stop it now. We need to stop. Wait for wondering, and we need to stop it now. Okay, this next one, I'm only going to just do 2 sets tonight. All right, 2 songs. This one's kind of funny because I was asked, this was commissioned, this song, by somebody in this room. I won't say who, but maybe this will give you an idea. Back in Detroit a few years back, some kind of outlandish, way far from mainstream group decided to bury a pink Hummer in an art park in Detroit. Of course, I know a secret. This never happened. What actually happened is they buried a Hummer and then painted it pink. Am I right? Yeah. Anyhow, they came into the Irish bar and they said, we need a funeral song. So I said, where's the free beer? So, all right. We got it eventually, and I think you'll all, this is comes from a genre of tunes that are called impossible sing-along, but we'll see what we can do. Let's take it even slower. In summertime, when pollution is high, you can drive a Hummer and burn inside. Well, there's something that oil is high. Have a drink and drive, or see the spots in light. If you're driving switch, you can go to the
Rusty Eisenberg. I'm a co-founder of Brooklyn for Peace. So first of all, I want to thank Dave Lippman, who is my next door neighbor in Teaneck, New Jersey. So it's always great to see David doing all these wonderful songs and building the spirit of all of us. I've been asked to introduce Medea, who needs no introduction. But I am happy to welcome her. Where is Medea? Oh, there you go. Okay. Medea, we want to welcome you to Brooklyn again. And you've been here several times, and you're one of the speakers that, when your name is suggested as somebody to appear, people don't say, oh my God, we heard her already. People know that whenever you're here, whenever you're visiting, you're going to have something interesting and important to say. You won't be repeating what you said the last time. So that's an achievement in and of itself. So I tried to download information about Medea, which turns out to be like a long list of all the places she's been arrested. And then I realized this morning I was having this hallucination because she spoke yesterday at my university with a lot of students, I think average age about 19, did a great job. Then I woke up this morning and I saw on Facebook she was picketing at the Washington Post. And then I looked again and it seemed like she was at the Pompeo hearing, which I guess wasn't true. And then I went on Common Dreams and she had an article this morning about presidential candidates. And I thought to myself, isn't she supposed to be here in Brooklyn? Or is she just everywhere? And so this hallucination, I think, actually reflects her contribution. I think everybody's here because we know who she is and the wonderful work she's done. And I think setting a really tremendous example for people around the country and all over the world about how you can do politics in a humanitarian way. And I was saying to her earlier when she spoke at my campus, what was just great about it was that she talked to students in a very normal, ordinary way that they could hear. And I think that's been one of your great contributions, not just your willingness to go to jail, not just your willingness to travel, but your ability to make politics and international issues human-sized for people. And to me, there's so many occasions where you just showed up and disrupted things, but disrupted that in a very constructive way. And I think of you at the time when Obama was giving that disappointing speech on drones, and hearing your voice at that moment was really inspirational for people everywhere who are upset about what it means that we assassinate people around the world. And I think of you going to the home of Brennan and knocking on his door and asking him, why are you using drones? A very simple interaction. And I think that that's been a great inspirational example for people, not just here in Brooklyn, but all around the country and elsewhere, of a kind of politics that builds movements, encourages people, and points you in new directions. Finally, I'm not reading your resume at all. She was arrested in a lot of places, and you can go on Wikipedia and find out where they all are. But I do want to mention that in addition to getting arrested and visiting people and speaking eloquently, Medea also writes books that are very clear and that people can read. We're selling them in the back, and one is about the U.S.-Saudi connection, which you've been raising for people in a very important way. And I think this is the most recent one, Inside Iran. So I want to encourage people to buy the books. I think there's much to be learned from them. And on behalf of Brooklyn for Peace, we're delighted that you could be with us. Thank you.
So it's wonderful to be here and see so many people. When I spoke at Rusty's school yesterday, you said in a way they can understand. Half of them were sleeping while I spoke, so. And having Dave Lippman start us out is wonderful. Where's Dave? And thank you for doing that Hummer song, which reminded me of, that was when the last Hummer was coming off the production lines in Detroit. And some of us had had campaigns against the Hummer for a long time. We had printed up these fake tickets, parking tickets. And every time we'd see a Hummer, we'd go and put the ticket on there, and they'd think they really got a ticket, and would say, the planet has given you a ticket for using this horrible vehicle. So that really Yeah, it was wonderful because the Hummer is gone. I mean, the ones you see now are either old Hummers or they're in the military or they're on our streets with our police, right? Unfortunately. But I think that bringing the Hummer back into here and recognizing that and I say that was a movement where the peace movement and the environmental movement, if you can really divide yourself, I mean, most of us are environmentalists and peace people and anti-racists and, all kinds of good issues. But where we really came together to focus on the Hummer, I remember it was Greenpeace, Rainforest Action Network, a whole bunch of groups were working together on that. And that's the kind of thing that can be really successful when we are intersectional like that. And as Rusty said, I have been, well, for the last maybe 11 years living in Washington, D.C. I moved there when my kids were grown and thought, I've been going back and forth to Washington since the time of the 9/11 attacks and the Iraq War and Afghanistan, and I actually liked being there. It's kind of a nice town compared to New York City. It's really like a small town. And it is also, I shouldn't use this word, but it's kind of target rich for us protesters. Everywhere you go, you say, I'm going to protest here, wait, I'm going to protest here, Congress, I'm going to protest there, Treasury over there. So there's always some good place to have a protest. And my philosophy is a protest a day tries to keep the fascists away, maybe. And what I have seen in the halls of Congress and in DC and around the country has been new energy around this Green New Deal. And it is something that has been around for a long time. If you ever listened to a Jill Stein speech from the Green Party, you would have heard her say always towards the end, and what we need is a Green New Deal, and she would explain it. And many people have been talking about it. But it really is the coming into office of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or as we know her, AOC, that has injected just a wonderful energy into the Washington scene and into this Green New Deal. And what I've been seeing in the environmental movement is at one time, sort of like the peace movement, the environmental movement tended to be older white folks. And then you saw a lot of young people getting involved in the environmental movement. And then maybe they were graduates in their 20s or so. And then you see people who were even in college through the Sunrise Movement that have taken this on in a very spectacular way. And I thought that is so amazing, getting people who are in college to take these things on. And then you see Greta Thunberg in Sweden in high school galvanizes a worldwide movement of people in high school or under, in like elementary school. And so there have been these fantastic demonstrations of incredible young people. I was at one in Washington, D.C. just the other day when Ilhan Omar, who I'll talk about more, but has been so maligned viciously, her daughter was there. And her daughter is 16 years old, and her daughter is one of the organizers of the national high school campaign around the environment. And you should have seen the beaming Congresswoman watching her daughter and thinking, already we have the next generation that's not just fighting these issues, but doing it in a really a way that gets their other students involved in it, brings music, brings fun, brings joy, and that's what you're seeing with the Green New Deal. Now, of course, it's facing the stodgy, elderly white men like Mitch McConnell who want to make sure the Green New Deal never gets to see the light of day. But the Congress is usually sort of the last to catch on. And as people are getting more and more excited, and not just excited about the solution, they're getting more and more just, upset about what's happening to our planet, there is tremendous momentum. And I don't know if any of you got a chance to see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez yesterday, in Congress when this stuffy Republican, Sean Duffy, started criticizing the whole Green New Deal and saying that that was for elitists. And she got so angry and she started saying, are you crazy? Elitists? Wait, we're talking about the kids in my district who are dying from asthma. We're talking about the kids in Flint, Michigan, who will never be the same again because of the water they had to drink. I'm talking about the people in the Midwest whose homes and livelihoods are destroyed by these floods. We're talking about real people and real issues. And it was just, a beautiful response to this guy who is clueless, but she really represents, this kind of energy and this kind of determination. And Rusty said that I don't have to convince anybody here that issues of war and the environment are related. And I think that's probably true. But I just do want to say a couple of things about the connections between war and the environment. We have some people here who got involved in peace issues from the Vietnam War days. And I know we have groups like Veterans for Peace here. Because Veterans for Peace has been taking groups to Vietnam year after year, that the legacy of the 20 million gallons of herbicides that the U.S. dumped on Vietnam, including Agent Orange, are still being felt today. That the agriculture's been affected, the foliage, the forests, and of course people's lives with cancer and radiation. And so that is 50 years later. So these wars, we can come up to more modern times, and we see that another connection is resource wars. In the days of the Bush administration, they didn't say we're going in to invade Iraq because of their oil, although many of us said no wars for oil. But we did say that if the main export of Iraq were broccoli, the U.S. would have never invaded, and that is certainly true. And we do see that today the Trump administration is totally overt about it. Donald Trump himself said, we should have just gone in and taken their oil in Iraq and gotten out of there. And it is no coincidence that the two places where this Trump administration is setting its sights is Venezuela and Iran, countries that have tremendous amounts of oil. We also see scarcity of resources being a source of conflict. I looked today at this amazing chart a group called the Pacific Institute has, and if you get a chance to look at it, they have the history of water conflicts, and they go back to 3000 BC. So water conflicts is not something new. But what they say is that it's being exacerbated today by climate crisis, by overpopulation, and they give the example of Syria, where there was a terrible drought starting in 2007 that went on to 2012, and how it destroyed 75% of the livestock, how it destroyed so much of the agricultural land, and led to this massive migration of over 1 million people, closer to 2 million, who first started migrating into the cities. And they're not saying this was the cause of the war in Syria, but they're saying this aggravated the situation and made people look towards the government as a problem because the government could not find solutions to the crisis. And this was true in Egypt as well, that was experiencing a drought at the same time that there was the rise of the Arab Spring in Egypt. So we see a lot of connections. Many of you here have worked on the issue of Israel-Palestine, and you know how important the issue is of Israel stealing the Palestinian water, and how much that contributes not only to the problem, but it's a real issue in terms of looking for solutions, because the Israeli lifestyle now depends on water that comes from Palestinian lands. So there's all kinds of connections between the issues of the environment and issues of war and conflict. But when you look at where we can find solutions, and we look towards the Green New Deal as something that is offering very bold solutions, it is quite disappointing that those who are pushing this forward aren't making those connections strongly enough. Because when people ask either Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or others, where is the money going to come from for the Green New Deal? And it needs a lot of money. They tend to say things like tax the rich, which is important to do, but it's still not enough because rich will always find ways to get around paying those taxes. And they say print more money, that this has been done for critical things before in our history, and that's true, and you can do that. But that's not enough of a solution either. If you want to look to where is the big, 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 big pot of gold in our treasury that gets given out by our members of Congress, it is the Pentagon budget. And we have to really push people to identify where that money is. And you know, when we talk about the discretionary funds, that's money that Congress can allocate for things, it's over half of that is going to the Pentagon. And if you compare our budget to any of the ones in the world, we are so beyond, in fact, close to what the entire world together spends, which is quite ironic when you see the Deputy Secretary of Defense speaking before Congress to justify the massive Pentagon budget. You know what he's using to justify it? Anybody take a guess?
Keeps people working.
Well, no, they don't, they say that, but he didn't say that. He said China. China, 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 he said. That's our big thing now. You know, the war on terrorism isn't giving, it's kind of wearing thin on people. So they need another one, and now that is China. So if you look at the budget that's being proposed by Donald Trump, it's really the antithesis to everything that people who care about people and the environment would stand for. Because it calls for cuts in things from food stamps to educational programs, massive cuts to the EPA, cuts even in the State Department, cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, cuts in affordable housing, but where the money then is allocated to is increases in the Pentagon. He's calling for close to a 5% increase in the Pentagon. And you know, there's a strategy they use to do this, is they put something out there that is so totally outlandish that even then some conservatives in the Congress will say, well, we can't go that far. They're calling for $760 billion. It's, quote, only 716 now. So they'll come to some, quote, compromise that'll be between the two, and it'll continue to be another huge handout for the Pentagon. Now let's remember, this is a Pentagon. Talk about winning a war with China. We can't win a war with the Taliban. Come on. And this is a Pentagon that can't pass an audit, has never been able to. The only entity in our government that has never been able to pass an audit. It was finally forced to take an audit last year and couldn't pass the audit. And there's so much money in the Pentagon budget that even Trump says we can take billions out of it for the wall, right? And it's a budget that calls for more money into nuclear weapons, when certainly it's a time when we should be forcing our government to join the UN ban on nuclear weapons and get rid of our nuclear weapons. Instead, it's putting more money into that and more money into this slush fund, the overseas contingency operations, which is really just in case we have another war, we want to have a lot of money in there. So it's a terrible budget, but it reflects the Trump administration, and unfortunately, it reflects most of Congress as well, because most of them year after year just rubber stamp these horrendous Pentagon budgets that rob us from the money we need for the Green New Deal. And so I wanted to move on to talk about where I see the Trump administration in terms of the war and peace issues. And there are actually some good things that Donald Trump is trying to do. And let's see, in the issues of war and peace, can anybody shout out any good thing you think he's trying to do?
Korea.
Korea. All right, let's go with Korea. You know, the Korean people have suffered so horribly from the time of during the Korean War and ever since, living in a state of uncertainty since the war ended in 1953 and never resulted in a peace treaty. And so it really came from the South Korean government and an incredible, beautiful movement in South Korea that I've had the opportunity to meet some of the people who were in the leadership. And this was a movement that said, we the people are going to force our government to make peace with the North. And they had a reactionary government power, and they got out on the streets, and they had what was called this candlelight revolution, because they went out in the evening with candles. And by the end, after months and months of protesting, 1 out of every 3 South Koreans had been out on the streets. And they were protesting corruption in their government, and they were demanding that there be an effort to make peace with the North. And so the energy from this did not come from Donald Trump. The energy for this came from the Koreans in South Korea who have the ability to get out on the streets and protest. They don't have that ability in the North because it's such a controlled society. But the Trump administration, to their credit, after doing the fire and fury and really creating havoc and potential nuclear war with North Korea, calmed down and said, okay, I'm going to do something spectacular that's going to win me a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm going to meet with the chairman, Kim Jong-un of North Korea. And that was a good thing. The fact that he walked away from the last meeting was a bad thing. The fact that they're continuing to talk is a good thing. And I say this because so many people in the Democratic Party, and I heard some of them today at the Pompeo hearing, which I wasn't there in New York, I would have been, in DC, I was watching it online, and my Cookman colleagues were there in the audience with their signs, and at one point interrupting Pompeo with some truth-telling. It's so disappointing to hear a lot of these Democrats say, Kim Jong-un will never give up on his nuclear weapons, and really criticizing the administration for even trying to come up with a peace deal. So that's a good thing, and we should be supportive of it. What's another good thing that the Trump administration is trying to do?
No TPP.
What?
No TPP.
No TPP.
Scuttled that, but I think
Yes.
he regrets it.
Yes, scuttled that, and renegotiating NAFTA, which actually has some positive things in the renegotiation. Anybody else? Syria. So he came out and against the deep state and the establishment and all kinds of people, he said, we want to get the troops out of Syria. Of course, he was then attacked from all sides, including from the liberal Democrats, saying, oh my goodness, we can't get out of Syria, that would be terrible. Donald Trump wants to get out of Syria. He's been forced with pushback now to make it slower than he said, to put more troops into Iraq, where he says from there that we can watch Iran and Syria and we can fight back. But he does want to get the troops out of Syria, and that is a good thing. There's one other good thing. Afghanistan. They are serious about talks with the Taliban. I mean, I made fun of the fact that our military can't beat the Taliban, and that's true. The Taliban controls tremendous amount of land right now, there is no military solution. I mean, we are going on 20 years in Afghanistan. It is ridiculous. The amount of money, the lives that have been lost for nothing in Afghanistan. And so Donald Trump wants to get the troops out of Afghanistan. You know, he said during his campaign, and he has said at other times, he wants to end the endless wars. So he has sent Zalmay Khalilzad, a very significant person to negotiate, and they are having serious negotiations. And I hope that they are successful. Again, they were being grilled by Democrats in Congress today who are upset about them talking to the Taliban, but that's the only way the war in Afghanistan is going to end. So those are a couple of good things that the Trump administration is doing and that we should support despite the fact that it is Donald Trump. We have to love peace more than we dislike Donald Trump. Right? So I only want to talk about some of the things that are getting worse. Israel-Palestine, I would say getting worse. Maybe we could talk about some of the ways that this Trump administration is even closer to the Israeli government than past administrations, and some of the things that they have done to make the situation even more intractable, recognizing all of Jerusalem as belonging to Israel. Somebody said, a Republican congressperson said today, if you want to dispute that Jerusalem belongs to Israel, go talk to God. A Republican
Do every day.
congressperson said.
The Golan Heights.
Huh?
The Golan Heights.
The Golan Heights. Done, you know, we talk about Russia interfering in our elections, and here Trump has made it a gift to Netanyahu for his election campaign to say the U.S. would recognize the Golan Heights. Moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, cutting the money for refugees, closing down the Palestinian Authority office in Washington, D.C., no peep about the illegality of continued settlements, total cover for Israel at the United Nations, and then this crazy talk that Jared Kushner is going to come out with a peace plan. So we are eagerly awaiting that peace plan, right? A peace plan that the Palestinians have already said, if he even comes out with it, it's dead on arrival. And the Arab countries are saying dead on arrival. So that is something that is getting worse. And we know just in the last couple of days, the Israelis pounding Gaza once again. Other places that are getting worse, I think, are the two countries that I mentioned as big oil producers. And very, very worrisome situation. The case of Venezuela. We should all be extremely worried about Venezuela right now. Some of us know that there has been in the past, and in fact we talked about it as the silver lining with all the horrible things going on in the Middle East, is that there was this pink tide in Latin America and all these progressive governments coming to power in Brazil and Argentina and Bolivia and Ecuador and Venezuela. And it was really exciting to see the kind of movement and the way that they were coming together to share resources and to defy the United States. The U.S. never wanted the Venezuelan revolution to succeed, never wanted Hugo Chavez to succeed, always was looking for a way to sabotage that government, including supporting the 2002 coup. And yes, the Venezuelan government has made lots of terrible economic mistakes. The Venezuelan government is very heavy-handed, and there are lots of human rights abuses. There are things about the Venezuelan government, just like many, many other governments, including our own, that we should criticize. But that does not give any legitimacy to the United States declaring Juan Guaido, who was never voted by anybody for president, where 6 million people voted for Maduro. It doesn't give the United States any legitimacy to impose economic sanctions that have taken a hard situation and made it infinitely worse on purpose, wanting people to be so miserable that they would rise up against their government. And it certainly doesn't give the U.S. government any legitimacy for any kind of military intervention in Venezuela. So now there were some Russian planes that arrived in Venezuela. The U.S. government, the Trump administration says, you better get out. They are really openly using the terms Monroe Doctrine right now, hearkening back to, what was it, 1812 with the Monroe Doctrine, and saying, not in our backyard. Latin America is our backyard. We will determine who is there. And so it's a very dangerous situation with the Russians supporting the Maduro government, the U.S. trying to divide the military in Venezuela, and the only the path that I see the U.S. taking it down is a civil war in Venezuela. And Latin Americans had so many years of horrendous wars, including in neighboring Colombia. We can't allow that to happen. And we certainly can't allow any kind of U.S. military intervention. And so I am one of the people that was horrified when I saw the opposition take over the consulate in New York Did anybody here go there? There was a great protest outside the consulate. And they took over 2 buildings in Washington, D.C. that belonged to the Venezuelan government that were for the military attaché. They just took those buildings over. And they said at a press conference where we were there to disrupt, they said that they were going to take over the Venezuelan embassy. And we thought, my goodness, we can't allow that to happen. And they came out in a paper in Colombia that it was going to be on Wednesday. This was last week. And so we called some people in the Venezuelan embassy and said, can we come and sleep there as part of a people's occupation of the embassy? And they said, sure, come over. So 5 of us went and slept in the embassy, and we called more people came out the next day, and we had a nice crowd inside the embassy. We redecorated the front of the embassy to say this belongs to the elected government of Nicolas Maduro. We put on the windows outside excerpts from the Vienna Convention back in, I think, 1961 that says how inviolable the property of embassies are in whatever is the host country, no matter what's going on between the host country and the country that has the embassy. And we stood our ground for the entire day Wednesday, and they never showed up. So that was good. And now we have an emergency response network in case anybody tries to go in and take over that embassy. We have quite a good number of people who said we will come down immediately, no matter what we're doing, we will come there to protect this embassy, because we know how horrible it would be to let the opposition take over the embassy. The symbolism of it would be just terrible. And it would also force the Venezuelan government to do the same, which is take over the U.S. Embassy in Caracas. And I pretty much think that if the Venezuelan government did that, the U.S. would consider it an act of war and would go in there. So it's really important. Things that you might think are symbolic, they're very, very important. So Venezuela, we have to make sure that our congresspeople are supporting the Sicilian bill. It's H.R. 1004, which is to say no military intervention in Venezuela. And we have to get organized and get people out on the streets. And I would have a continuing protest in front of the consulate that they took over, because really that is not their property.
Who's sponsoring that?
That's built by David Lippman.
From where?
And he is from Rhode Island. And there are, the last I looked, there were 54 co-sponsors. So it's got quite a good list of co-sponsors, but we need to have a lot more than that. And everybody who's in the Progressive Caucus should certainly be on that. And it's very clear in the legislation. It's not supporting Nicolas Maduro. It's stopping a U.S. intervention. So that's one place. And the other is Iran. So I just got back from Iran. We had a group of 28 people. It was a fantastic trip, very hard to get the visas. You know, you can go to Iran as a tourist. You're allowed from our government to go to Iran, and the Iranians allow you to go. There aren't a lot of groups that go. But we went in a little more difficult way, because we went as more of a people-to-people educational kind of thing. And so it was harder to get the Iranians to give us the visas. They really carefully checked who was going and everything. But finally, when we got the visas, we did the trip. The first day of our trip, we had a hour-and-a-half long meeting with the foreign minister, which was quite remarkable, not only because it was such a great meeting, but also because it turned out the next day he resigned. Did you hear that? You hear about the foreign minister? He resigned, but the president did not accept his resignation, and so many people in their parliament, as well as in the society in general, came back and said, no, you can't resign, we need you here. Then he came back in. But he talked to us for an hour and a half about U.S. betrayal after betrayal after betrayal. And he said, you know, we are an ancient civilization. You are a brand new one. We go back thousands of years. In fact, he said we count in millennium. It seems like yesterday to us that the U.S. did a coup to overthrow our democratically elected government in 1953. That was like yesterday. And it is on the minds of everybody in Iran. They will not forget when the U.S., because that government in Iran wanted to nationalize the oil, the U.S. went in and engineered a coup. And then they say, since then, there have been so many other betrayals. And one of them became clear to us a couple of days later when we went to visit something called the Peace Museum. And it's run by people who had been involved in and suffered from the Iran-Iraq War that happened between 1980 and 1988, when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. It was not Iran's fault. Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. And what did the U.S. do? Sided with Saddam Hussein, sold them weapons, and gave them the materials to produce chemical weapons. And these men who showed us around the Peace Museum were the victims of that. One had both his legs blown off, one had a hacking cough the whole time that he led us around, and one had tears that kept coming out of his eyes from the chemical weapons. This is since the 1980s. And they said, we remember the United States supporting Saddam Hussein during that time. We also talked to the foreign minister about his long, tedious negotiations for the Iran nuclear agreement. Negotiations that he said had been going on for over a decade, and then intensely under the Obama administration. And he talked about how they fought over every paragraph, every sentence, every word in that document, and to think that Donald Trump is going to get something else, he said, is ridiculous. That was negotiated with the entire world community, approved by the entire world community, and Donald Trump unilaterally pulls out. And what the foreign minister basically said to us is that this is destroying his reputation with the people. Because when the U.S. pulled out, it imposed these very, very harsh sanctions that are destroying people's lives. 80 million people in Iran are suffering the collective punishment of Donald Trump deciding that he didn't like the Iran nuclear deal. Why? Because Israel and Saudi Arabia didn't like the Iran nuclear deal. So 80 million people have to suffer from that. And this is called extraterritorial sanctions, where it's not just U.S. companies that are not allowed to trade. It is all companies around the world. If you want to do any business with the United States or do any business in dollars, which is over 90% of world trade, you cannot trade with Iran. And they were boasting in that hearing today how they had sanctioned over 1,000 individuals and entities for having violated the U.S. illegal pulling out of an agreement that was ratified by the United Nations. So the ones who were obeying the agreement are getting punished for it, and the Iranian people are getting punished for it. And we heard person after person telling us things like, oh, food and medicine is supposed to be exempt, but medicines are drying up because the pharmaceutical companies are afraid to send things, the banks are afraid to process, the shipping companies are afraid to ship, and the insurance companies are afraid to insure. And aside from that, people don't have money anymore, so they don't have the money to buy this stuff. And so there are all kinds of shortages now happening. And when Brian Cook, do you know him? He is the special envoy of Donald Trump for Iran, but really against Iran. He spoke to AIPAC, and he got tremendous applause when he said, Iran is suffering its worst economic crisis in its 40-year history, and the people at AIPAC thought that was just fantastic. And I think, how sad, how sick, how horrible, how anti-people can you be to blame the Iranian people, 80 million people, because you don't like their government? And really this whole mantra that they always say that Iran is the #1 source of terrorism in the world is just BS. You want to tell me the #1 source of terrorism in the world?
Israel.
Okay, so some of you say Israel, some of you say the US, and some would say Saudi Arabia. So I think all of them would be good contenders for the number one spot. But it really is not Iran. So there is just a drumbeat for war with Iran right now, and it's getting harsher and harsher. And in fact, those of us who are peacemakers, when some of you might know Colonel Ann Wright, who is a wonderful peacemaker, well, 26 of our people got back into the U.S. with no problem. Ann Wright and I come bringing up the rear, and lo and behold, not only do we get stopped at customs for post-secondary search, where they insist they can take and did take our electronics, to take anything off of it and everything off of it that they want. And if we refused, they would be confiscated. But after that, then they told us, there are some gentlemen waiting for you over there who would like to speak to you. Anybody have a guess of who they were? The FBI. The FBI wanted to talk to us about the scary thing of a peace delegation going to Iran. Let me tell you, the Iranian people, I think, are the nicest people in the world. They're the most hospitable, the most wonderful. Everyone in our delegation, when they're approached by somebody, it would be kisses and hugs, and can you come to my house for dinner, and next time you have to stay with me, and we love Americans. But to the FBI, it was just a very, terrible thing that we had gone as a peace delegation to Iran. So there are some things that we can do about Iran. The other issue we heard from Iranians is about the Muslim ban, because they're part of that Muslim ban, even though there has never been one Iranian who has been involved in any kind of terrorist activity in the United States. And time after time they would say, I can't go see my daughter, I can't study in the United States. The vice mayor of Tehran met with us, and he said, I got my PhD from the United States, and I wanted to have my son study in the United States. And he's a very party line guy, and he's not a super, well, certainly not a rah-rah US, but he thinks the US educational system is really good, and he thinks exposure to the US is good. His son got into Cornell, but because the Muslim ban was not allowed to go there. And so he said, it just doesn't make sense. If you want Iranians to have a back and forth and learn how great the United States is, why are you keeping us out? And so there are 2 bills in Congress trying to lift the Muslim ban that we can be supporting. And there's also the issue of there will be a piece of legislation soon to say we should rejoin the Iran nuclear agreement, but right now it's really important to get people on record for that, especially the presidential candidates. So we've been working very hard to have them publicly come out and put it on their platforms. And one thing that has been extremely successful that we're very excited about is that it is now in the Democratic Party's own platform to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. That's a very, very positive thing, and in fact the foreign minister knew about it and said that they were encouraged by it, and basically said that the fate of Iran is in the hands of the people of the United States. If you don't get that guy out of the White House, Iran is in big trouble and the whole world is in big trouble. And they said, and so we've managed to get, Bernie Sanders says, yes, rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. So does Elizabeth Warren, so does Tulsi Gabbard. And one person we haven't gotten, and it should be a no-brainer, is Kristen Gillibrand, because she voted for it. So we have been contacting her, and we would encourage, if there's a call that you can make tomorrow to her office, to say, please come out publicly and put it in your presidential platform that you support rejoining the Iran nuclear agreement. So just a couple of other things before I close. In the vein of positive things we can do, the work around trying to stop the U.S. support for the catastrophic war in Yemen has been extremely good work. And that is because there's a broad coalition, including lots of you here who have been hounding your senators and your congresspeople, including people from the humanitarian aid community that have seen how horrific conditions are in Yemen, including some people on the right who are against these endless wars, including the libertarian group the Cato Institute, including the Koch brothers, believe it or not, including the group Freedom Works. There's been a very broad coalition that's been very successful, using something that hasn't been used since the time of the Vietnam War, which is the 1973 War Powers Act. And we will very soon see another vote in the House to pass it, and it's already passed in the Senate, and it passed in another version in the House, so it should pass again, and will go on the President's desk. He will probably veto this, but it sends a very, very strong message coming from the American people, going through our Congress to say, stop supporting the Saudi bombing of Yemen. Very important for us to do. And the last thing I wanted to mention is around the campaign divesting from the war machine. You have a wonderful resolution that you're trying to get your city council to pass called Move the Money. We also have a campaign where we're trying to get our Congress people to agree not to take money from the weapons industry. And here again, like the Green New Deal, we're kind of piggybacking on the momentum from the campaign to divest from the fossil fuel industry, the campaign to divest from the private prison industry, campaigns to divest from Israeli companies. So this is another divestment campaign, very, very important, that we're getting cities to pass, we're getting universities to pass, and we're getting Congress people to say that they will pledge not to take money from the weapons industry. And there's already a number of them that agree to that, and we need to get more, so we would like to get your help in that campaign. And I think we have another campaign around the divest that our new Code Pink staff person will tell you about. But just before that, just to sum up by saying, this is a time of great momentum because we have the presidential campaigns coming up. And I know a lot of people are worried that you might not even support the Democrats, but you're so anxious to get Trump out. We've got to get one of those Democrats, and this is a long time where people are going to beat each other up, and maybe they'll come out so bruised that Trump will get in again. And sure, I mean, there's all of those worries. But it also is a time when we can get a lot of these issues out in the open. And there's a time when we can really push on these issues. For example, Tulsi Gabbard has made ending the wars the centerpiece of her campaign. And I would say she is already helping to force Bernie Sanders to talk more about these foreign policy issues and the military-industrial complex. He has talked more about it in the little time that he has started his campaign now than he did during the entire time of his last presidential campaign. So we are making progress getting these issues out. We are making progress with our intersectionality. We are making progress in building momentum to force the members of Congress to do a better job to represent the real values that we have as human beings, which don't include strangling people through sanctions, and the values that we have in trying to save this beautiful planet that we live on. So I encourage you, I thank you for all the work that you've been doing, and I encourage us to just keep on going and do more in the coming months ahead. Thank you.
Well, I want to say big thanks to Medea. Certainly, as always, very inspirational and very, at least for me, rousing in feeling, in making us feel empowered, making us feel that any actions we take can actually have an effect, and laying out very explicitly some real specific issues that we can get active on. As we said before, we're going to do a Q&A. Medea's books are in the back for sale, and they will be signed by the author if you would like that. So any of you who want to go out or want to take a few minutes, there's a table set up back there. We are also going to be passing the bucket around. Again, these events are free, but they're not really free to hold. The space has been generously given to us by the Friends Social Action Committee. But there are the flyers, there's mailings, there's all kinds of expenses that still go with it. And so I ask each of you to please be as generous as possible and we will be passing buckets around. Well, also, this is still the first quarter of the new year. You're still in time to become a member of Brooklyn for Peace. We've got a lot of things coming up. I think you've been getting mailings, you've been getting emails, so you know that we're having an active year. And to be part of that, it's great that you show up, but be able to say that you are a member of this organization, that you support us financially, but you also, this is an organization, almost a family, that you want to be able to say that you are a member of. And so, if you haven't signed up with us this year, please consider doing that tonight. There are membership forms in the back, or any of the people at the table. If you tell them that you want to be a member, they'll put your name down on the form and you'll be a member. We ask $30 membership fee. We would hope that you could give more, and if that is too much for you, you can give less. If you can't afford anything at all, we would still love for you to be a member of Brooklyn for Peace. I also want to tell you about upcoming events. We're going to be having another forum on April 18th with Bill Hartung, who will be talking in a very related way about the Pentagon budget and what New York City is losing because of all the money that it's sending down to Washington and that Washington is giving to the military machine. This is very specific. It is not just rhetoric. It's that the money that we don't have for our subways, for our schools, for affordable housing, for all the things that you could name that our city is lacking or is in poor condition, could be paid for. I want to say college tuition as well. Could be paid for if so much money wasn't being spent on the military. It's become commonplace to say now that the United States spends more on the military than the next 8 countries combined. But even though that's become de rigueur to say, it is still true. It is an outrageous amount of money and has nothing to do with defending our country. And so I hope that you will come on April 18th. I hope you will tell other people about it, because it also segues into the Move the Money campaign, which Medea just mentioned. There's all kinds of ways that this campaign is being undertaken throughout the country, but one very specific place here is in New York City, where there is a resolution before the City Council which says that it's the sense of the City Council that funding should be taken from the Pentagon to meet the needs of our community here in New York City, but to cities throughout the country. Now, 2 years ago, the U.S. Council on Mayors passed a similar resolution that mayors overwhelmingly voted for, including our own illustrious Bill de Blasio, voted in favor of this resolution. There were 3 of them, actually, which said that cities throughout the country should be passing these resolutions, should be holding hearings to make it clear to the citizenry that the money isn't just going into the vapor, that money is being taken from our cities and being given to the military for wars that we don't want to fight in, that don't make us safer, that in fact make it more dangerous for us. And Code Pink is also engaged in a Divest from the War Machine campaign, which is a similar, not exactly the same campaign, which is calling on universities, nonprofits, cities to move their investments out of companies that are making money out of weaponry and other things that have to do with the defense industry. So we hope that you keep those on your docket and that you'll be coming. We do have other forums coming up that we have one in May on immigration in Central America. I don't want to say the date because I'm not sure that it's 100% confirmed. And we're hoping to have a member event too, another reason to become a member appreciation event in June. That should be a good social event. And so I want to thank you all for that, and we'll be having a Q&A Q&A now with Medea.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just thinking about two things that just came into my mind. I was thinking about a few things that came into my mind that maybe we should consider and talk about. One is the relationship between the immigration crisis and climate change, particularly in Central America, particularly in Honduras. And I was down in Tijuana, and I think you can see that very clearly. That's number one. And two, I wanted to talk about, just make a statement about what I think is quite important with the Green New Deal. And that is to talk about a transition and to talk about how jobs will be created. And that when we talk to people, we need to really, really emphasize that it's going to lead to losing of jobs in certain sectors, but really the gain of jobs in many other sectors. And for working class people, it's extremely important that we talk this way. That's just
Yeah, thank you. Both important points. In terms of migration, it's true of Central America, where there have been also this cycle of droughts and floods. And it's also true of the violence in Central America, so the combination of wars and climate chaos. And of course we see that throughout Northern Africa and in the Middle East. And when you see the mass migration to Europe, a lot of that was caused by climate chaos. And think of just what's going to come in the future when folks are talking about heat of 120, 130 degrees in some places where people are not going to be able to live, where they're going to have to flee. And we already see how Europe has been really a tremendous upheaval with the rise of the right, in part because of this migration. So it is a huge issue, and thanks for making that connection as well. And then the other thing you said was the transition in jobs. And I don't know if any of you have seen this. It's a great study that's been updated that the University of Massachusetts did, showing how many more jobs that you could get through anything from education to healthcare, and particularly for green jobs, than the money that's invested in the military. So every time they say, we can't close down this factory because it's jobs, we have to say transition, transition, transition. Yes.
And what I want to ask you to please talk to us about is something that's, I find sometimes controversial in the peace movement. And that is when you're talking about coalition building and getting out on the street, let's say about Venezuela. And there's an organization that's called for a demonstration, and other organizations don't agree with everything that one has to say. Do you or does Code Pink have principles about when you decide to co-sponsor or what it is that you do decide to do? And I just think it would be very helpful to us to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, I know it's a tough issue. We really feel that it's important to make coalition with groups that we might not agree with totally, but they're out on the streets doing something about it. And in this case, when you look around and see who organized against the U.S. intervention in Venezuela, it was pretty much the Answer Coalition. They got people to D.C., they got people out in demonstrations in Los Angeles. When we said the embassy is under attack, come on down, they got people to come. And so I think especially now when there is such a danger of things like military intervention in Venezuela, and there are so few groups. You know, when a number of us were younger, there was a large coalition around Latin American solidarity. Many of us went to Central America, made friends, learned the language, became part of a solidarity movement here. There were sanctuary churches all over the United States. There is not that same kind of movement. There's the support around immigration issues, but it doesn't extend to the broader issues around things like Venezuela. So I say we should applaud people who are getting out on the streets and saying no to intervention, and we should be on the streets with them.
So we all know that the U.S. government has frozen the money from Citgo and Venezuela's money in U.S. banks illegally. Can we get a list of those banks and start targeting those banks through our own direct action So can we bypass, in a sense, this begging Congress for things only? And let's not hit Citibank if that's who it is. Do you know which the banks are? We could boycott those banks, we could demand that they unfreeze the money that's desperately needed in Venezuela.
That's a fabulous idea. I didn't think of that, and I can find out what banks there are, and if you leave me a note, we'll follow up about that. I think it is a great idea, because we always have to look for targets that are not just Congress, and not just standing outside the White House. So, yes, I think it's a great thing to do, and you know, it's billions of dollars that they have frozen, and it really is money that the Venezuelan government would spend a lot of it on medicines that are scarce right now.
So let's put a committee together from this very meeting, not put it off. Those who want to work on it, see us afterwards, and we'll put a committee together to work on that.
Fantastic. Maybe we could just put a separate sheet on the table back there, on the cooking table, and people can sign up if they want to be part of it. That's great.
Hi, Medea. Thanks for being with us tonight. Always great to listen to you. My question has to do with, I guess, the Green New Deal. And if you could go into a little bit more detail in terms of your sense as to how quickly we can see the forces for peace joining with the climate change movement, and is the Green New Deal the key? Thank you.
I think it's one of the keys, and that we should be looking for those opportunities wherever they are. A number of people have been involved in the Poor People's Campaign, and as part of the Poor People's Campaign, it took the Martin Luther King trilogy of racism, poverty, and militarism, and added environmental issues into that. And so every time there was a major gathering around the Poor People's Campaign, it brought all of these issues together, and still continues to do that. The Poor People's Campaign is strong in some cities and states and not so strong in others, but it's another good vehicle to use. The Green New Deal, you know, we and the group World Beyond War have proposed language to try to get added into the Green New Deal. That talks about this relationship of war and environment, and also talks about the Pentagon funds as a place to get money from. And we're in sort of slow talks with people about that, but it would be nice to up the pressure on that and have it be really very clear in their materials. We as Code Pink always go out to any major environmental demonstrations with our War is Not Green banners, and we try to make sure that it's in the points, that the demonstration points of unity come about. So I think, you know, wherever there are opportunities, but certainly the Green New Deal is where there's a lot of momentum right now, so that should be a place that we are there in solidarity as part of, and I think we should all consider ourselves environmentalists as well, but try to insert these issues in.
I assume that some of us, or many of us here, are against the Indian point and against nuclear energy for this country. It is not a big stretch for us to also wish the same for Iran. And in your travel, I assume, or I hope, that you met with people who are against the idea of nuclear energy for Iran. If a country that is relatively resource-rich like Iran pretends to have a need for nuclear energy, what hope is there for any poor countries like India, which the United States or Russia or China can't mess with? What hope is there? I mean, we have to think in long term energy solution. And then here's a quote from Rovira. He used to say that this country got prosperous thanks to unspoiled land, lots of timber, slave energy, and cheap energy. And we have a hard time contracting. The same problem exists for all other countries, including China, India, and Iran. Iran did not have 80 million people 40 years ago.
what did they think? How did they think that they could maintain a life standard or increase in population? I'm from Turkey, I can say the same thing about Turkey. Turkey doesn't even have oil.
Yeah, and good points that you're making. One of the reasons we supported the Iran nuclear deal is because it would stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon if indeed that's where they were going. We certainly want to see an end to nuclear weapons and phasing out of nuclear energy as well. It was very funny in Iran because we worked very hard to get the itinerary that we wanted, but there were a couple of things on the itinerary that they said you must go to, and they forced us to go to, and one of them was a nuclear reactor. And it was so funny because people in our group had been like you protesting nuclear energy for so many years. Because we don't want to go to a nuclear reactor, And they forced us to go, and their point was to say, we are using this for educational purposes and for medicines and for peaceful purposes. And we maintain this same position that we want to see a phasing out of all nuclear energy, and they said, it's one thing to be selective about what countries can do what, but internationally, by international law, we have the right to nuclear energy. And by international law, why is it that Iran is singled out around its nuclear program when nobody talks about Israel? And they talk a lot about Israel and Iran of saying it has hundreds of nuclear weapons and nobody ever says anything about it. The US government doesn't even admit it and doesn't do anything to force Israel to join the non-proliferation treaty or allow any inspectors into Israel. And they point to countries right by them, which is India and Pakistan, and say they never joined the non-proliferation treaty. Their weapons are totally illegal, and yet nobody's threatening them. So it's this selective kind of, we will target Iran. And another really bad thing is happening, which is young people who are against nuclear weapons in Iran are now rallying in favor of leaving the deal and saying, hey, we did the deal and then the US violated it. Let's pull out of the deal and let's get a nuclear weapon because that seems like the only way that we will have some respect. Look at North Korea. And it's a horrible thing for them to conclude, but you could certainly understand why they would go in that direction. And it was in the hearings today with Pompeo that one of the congresspeople brought out that there were secret agreements that the US has been providing technology for nuclear material to Saudi Arabia. And the Congress wants to know what those secret agreements are. And I thought it was kind of clever the way one of the guys, the congressman said it is, if we can't trust them with a bone saw, are we really going to trust them with nuclear material?
We're here at the meeting house of the Society of Friends, which is a religious organization, but it's just one religious organization. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about activating churches, more of them, acting more in unison. It seemed that was very important during the Vietnam War. But now we're in an era of perpetual war, which in a way almost makes it a pale comparison. And also, since I'm last in line, maybe I can ask you another, which is, you mentioned a number of positions that you hope that presidential candidates would be taking and the ability to pressure them between each other. And there are so many wars, so many of those issues, and so many presidential candidates. Is there some kind of visual grid up somewhere right now where we can look and see where everyone stands on those issues?
So Rusty mentioned that I just did an article on that, and we're trying to put that into a graphic as well, but you can find the article on several websites like Common Dreams and Alternate and Truth Big and Truth Out, a number of them put it up. But it does go candidate by candidate on a number of those issues. And then in terms of the churches, the Poor People's Campaign is faith-based and and has a lot of churches that are involved in it, particularly in the South. And there are quite a number of churches that are involved around the immigration issues. But around these issues of the wars, it's precisely the fact that there are so many different ones. And I would say about Yemen, there has been a very good interfaith group that has been working on this, of Presbyterians, of Methodists, Jewish groups, Muslim groups. So that is one area where I think we can see it as an example. And our hope is that once this finally passes both the Senate and the House in the same form and goes up to the President's desk, that this will be seen as an example both of using the War Powers Act, and we can use it in other situations, and also an example of this broad-based coalition that I mentioned, you know, left and right, but it really has quite a strong interfaith component to it as well.
Is there anyone else out there who has not spoken? We'd love to hear some diverse points of view, particularly of demographics who haven't felt welcome to get up and speak. So can I encourage anyone who has any other questions or last questions for Ms. Benjamin if you're not able to come up on the mic, we can try to bring it to you. I'd just like to mention one thing. Some of you may have heard that 3 Mile Island, the remaining plant is closing, which I think is a great thing. And I had a question. Is there a tally of the cost of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan? And imagine what we could do with that money.
Yes, there's a very good group called the National Priorities Project, and they have not only a cost of the war, they have the trade-offs of what you could get if, and how much each city and each state is spending on the wars and what you could use that money for. So I encourage you to go to National Priorities Project to look at that. There's also great work that has been done by Brown University, the Watson Institute there, that looks at the cost of the war in its totality, including health care for veterans for years to come, payment on the debt because of the war, all of those things combined. I don't want to lug a whole box of books home in my suitcase tonight. I have to go back to DC this evening. So we're giving you a special deal. It's sliding scale. You pay $10, which is cost 10 to 20, and I would love to sign some books for you. So I'll be out by the table. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight.
And thank you, Medea, and thank all of you for coming out tonight. Medea said the books are in the back, so we're signing them now. I hope we'll see you again in April. And I hope that you will be responding. Pretty soon we're going to be sending out sign-ups via email for our weekend tabling on street corners and upcoming street fairs. So get a very easy way, if you haven't been active in a while, spending an hour or two at the table, talking to people, handing out leaflets, seeing what people are concerned about, and illuminating for them that 60% of the federal discretionary budget goes to the military. People are astonished. If you've been to our tables, you know a little penny hall where people decide how they want tax dollars to go. So come out for an hour or two with us, especially when the weather is fine, and you'll have a good time. Thanks everyone, and good night.
Even the reps who we think are on the same side as us need to be reminded of certain things. So
Absolutely. I can't tell you the number of times they said, nobody's come in to talk to me about that. Everybody is here.
Was this the basket that didn't make it to the front row? Oh, really? The basket,
I love it. When kids stand out of this thing, that's like... Thank you.
Yeah, wait.